Let me be clear, this is not proven. What is absolutely decisively known is that this possibility was known from the start, and it was pushed aside so that people who claimed that this was a laboratory leak were called crackpots, conspiracy theorists, and so forth by people who knew that this was a real possibility. The amount of lying that went on to the American people in the uh, days, early period of the pandemic is now fully documented because of leaks, whistleblowing, and Freedom of Information Act releases. I think this discussion is of profound significance for the world. Our safety and our survival may depend on us getting to the bottom of what happened with COVID, because there are reasons to believe that this was a laboratory created virus and one that was funded by the US government. And that fact, if it turns out to be the case, it is not certain, but there are reasons to believe it to be the case, that it was covered up the investigation of that possibility. Let me say that I chaired a commission for the Lancet Medical Journal for several years on COVID. And one of the issues before that commission was the question of the origin of the virus, SARS-CoV-2, that caused the pandemic and that causes the disease. And we looked intensively at this question and followed the evidence and followed the forensic evidence as well. And by forensic evidence, I mean the investigative patterns that many brave investigative reporters pursued, because the US government did not act honestly, and the scientists engaged with the US government did not act honestly. My experience on these issues dates back more than a quarter century, because I have advised the World Health Organization on pandemic diseases. I played a direct role in designing and creating the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB, and Malaria, and have been involved with the question of pathogenic disease for a very long time. Let me again say at the outset of our discussion, we don't know the full story of the origin of this virus. There are, of course, two main hypotheses. One is that it came out of nature, and the second is that it came out of a laboratory experiment. And I believe that the weight of the evidence is the latter, but I would not say it's conclusive. Yes, very heavily. There are, again, multiple interpretations of how a laboratory creation and or release of this virus may have occurred. But I think the weight of the evidence on that hypothesis is that the basic scientific work in creating such a virus, if that's what happened, would have taken place in the United States, though the testing and possible accidental release of the virus may have happened in China. But clearly there was a US-China research program funded by Tony Fauci's division at the National Institutes of Health. And the nature of that work, the background of that work, the plausibility that that work resulted in this virus called SARS-CoV-2 was hidden from the American people, and many key facts that would be directly ascertainable continue to be hidden. And let me say that under any circumstance, in my view, Rand Paul's investigation is superbly right, brave, accurate, no vendetta. It is trying to find the truth of a pandemic that killed more than 1 million Americans and more than 7 million people worldwide. By counts, 20 million people. And Rand Paul bravely is pursuing this. The point, basically, is that dangerous research was being done and was contemplated to be extended in the years and months leading up to the pandemic itself. The kind of virus that causes the COVID-19 disease, a coronavirus, is the object of extensive research. Probably the world's leading researcher on this is a professor that, as I understand it, has been dismissed now from University of North Carolina. And there were very important grant proposals in the lead up to the epidemic that described extraordinarily dangerous research that point to the very changes in the virus that were observed that cause this disease. And there is reason to believe that this research was done under NIH funding, that it was led by a research team at University of North Carolina, that research involved altering the natural genome, the genes of these coronaviruses, to create a new coronavirus that is what led to the pandemic. And the most significant sign of that is a change of the genome from what has ever been observed before in this class of viruses that is called a furin cleavage site. It is a number of genes that are added to the spike, the gene that in the spike that codes for the spike protein of this virus that makes SARS-CoV-2 so infective for human beings. And the research proposal that was hidden from the public view says that it was the intention of this team at the University of North Carolina and its partner team in the Wuhan Institute of Virology to insert these genes into a backbone of a virus that did not have those particular genes, that did not have a furin cleavage site, with the idea that that would change the behavior of the virus and make it more infective. This was spelled out in a research proposal that is shocking. It's called the diffuse proposal. And one of the most awful parts of all of this, Judge, is that that proposal was known to all these protagonists at the moment that the pandemic broke out, and it was hidden from view that there had ever been such a proposal. What is known is that the Defense Department had issued a call for proposals, and a proposal was made that this research team that was a U.S.-China joint research team would insert this furin cleavage site into a virus backbone for a very peculiar purpose, by the way, weird, and I don't want to take us too far away, but to make a vaccine that would vaccinate bats. Strange enough, not vaccinate humans, but the idea was that bats in China would come into contact with this artificial construct designed in North Carolina, in essence, and by being vaccinated by this virus would then not be able to harbor viruses that would be dangerous to American fighters fighting in Asia. It's bizarre, but that was the diffuse proposal. It was a Defense Department proposal. American soldiers may fight in Asia. They may come into contact with the dangerous viruses carried by bats, will infect bats with a kind of vaccine so that those bats won't be able to be the reservoir or be able to carry viruses that could then infect American troops. Yes, he knew all of this from the first moment, and the scientists around him knew all of this, and key actors knew all of this. And this particular proposal, which was ostensibly turned down by the Defense Department because it was too dangerous, was only revealed in 2021 by a whistleblower who posted it, made it public, not because the government said, oh my God, let's see what had been proposed. Now, the hypothesis is that though the Defense Department turned it down, the work continued anyway on NIH grants, that is, on grants from the division, the National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Disease, that Fauci headed, and that the grants that Fauci was giving, in effect, enabled the continuation of a grant that had been turned down by another branch of U.S. funding, by what's called DARPA, which is a Defense Department agency, which had turned it down. So the argument is this extraordinarily dangerous research was proposed. It was a U.S.-China joint scientific venture. It was potentially extremely dangerous. It was turned down for that reason. It was funded otherwise because the same protagonists were on NIH grants that were funded. The work continued, the virus was created, and it escaped from laboratory testing in China when it was being tested on bat colonies maintained in the China Institute after having been created by the U.S. scientists. That's the hypothesis.
Okay,
and just to say, it's easy to send viruses, as one virologist said to me and said publicly, viruses are sent in the mail all the time.
Really?
They're constructed, they're put on filter paper, they are carried on airplanes in gear that scientists carry to and from. One of the members of this research group worked at Wuhan